Welcome and hello everybody to this webinar. My name is Maria Lobato. I am with Lumu's marketing team and I'll be your host for today's session on security testing limitations and how to overcome them. David Sylvester is the speaker for today's webinar. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. You can send your questions using the question panel on your screen and we will answer them at the end of the session. Also, we will be recording today's session and we will be sending you the replay via email afterwards. So without further ado, let's get started. David?
Thanks, Maria. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Welcome to today's session. My name is David Sylvester. I'm the Vice President of Lumu Technologies, and our mission is to end the era of the breach dark days. Today, we're going to delve into cybersecurity testing and really what we're focused on today around penetration testing and vulnerability scanning. And I'm going to introduce a novel concept of continuous compromise assessments, which really I believe you guys can really bring this into your own security programs to continue to evolve, which we really need to do. When you compare how cybersecurity is performing with testing with other industries, it gets really interesting. We're going to draw some parallels today. So as Maria said, I'd love to hear you throughout this session. I appreciate your engagement. Please submit any questions on that chat feature to the right. And for those of you now just joining, let's get started. All right, so when you look at throughout the course of history, through various industries, you can see that we've reached everything we are today as a society thanks to relentless testing. Whether that's from electricity, transportation, manufacturing, internet, all of these industries, to get to where they are now, they've undergone relentless testing and they've utilized the scientific method. On the picture here, you have Thomas Edison, who's known as one of America's greatest inventors. He sought out to make the first commercially feasible light bulb and replace gas and oil-based products, light bulbs through gas and oil. And it was no easy feat, you can imagine. And he was one of the first inventors that really put principles of organized science and research into the process of invention. Now, at first, his light bulb, it didn't last too long, right? Maybe only a couple minutes, then an hour. Ultimately, he was able to get over those obstacles, make a patent, and form the first light bulb. And I think, this is a great example, and it's accurate to say that all of our luxuries in life today, from airplanes, from manufacturing to the internet itself, we owe all of these thanks to relentless testing from the scientific method. Now, looking into cybersecurity, where are we as an industry? How did we even start, right? And where are we heading? The concept of cybersecurity testing, it goes back to when human beings wanted to understand the enemy's thought processes, right? We wanted to know how they'd respond, very similar to pen testing. Pen testing, in 1984, the US Navy thought it would be a good idea to do ethical hacking and just show how easy it is to breach one of their own bases. And throughout those years, hacking has become much more sophisticated. Cybersecurity testing has had to evolve and become more advanced, and it has. There are more standards put out there by OWASP and other entities that are making standard testing guidelines. And there's a huge market. Cybersecurity testing, I'm sure many of you on today's call do your pen testing, do vulnerability scanning. But are you ever left that we're missing something still, right? Is there something else we can be doing? And that's where I want to kind of challenge you today to really think about that and explore that question. Okay, so breaches. I love this image because it contrasts two different types of breaches. I'm sure we've all seen a slide that has all these logos on it, the latest, biggest, and baddest breach that happened, whether it's Capital One, Home Depot, Target, whatever. let's just show a whale breaching for an example. It's a beautiful sight. They come out of their water, up to 90% of their body coming out and make a huge splash. It's a shame that our security breaches are not this beautiful. When you look at the statistics, the numbers keep climbing. You're seeing an increase. The Identity Theft Resource Center, for example, in 2017 showed there were 1,600 breaches, more than 1,600 breaches, and they were spread out across all of our industries. And this is just, it's just a snapshot of what we're dealing with. So as these breaches continue to pile up, what's alarming is our testing procedures as an industry are staying the same. They're actually, stagnated. And this shouldn't be, right? Something has to give if we're gonna to really stop this challenge of breach and compromise. We need to evolve our cybersecurity testing, and that's what we're going to explore today. Okay. Now, looking at the numbers again, looking a little differently, these numbers are eye-popping. First off, it takes over 7 months for us to simply detect a data breach, right? 7 months. Think about that. Over 200 days to even come to terms, to even know that we've been breached. That's very slow. There's a lot of examples such as Citrix and Yahoo. These are companies that have you can bet that they've performed cybersecurity testing with your traditional pen testing and vulnerability scanning multiple times every year. If Citrix did this, 2 times a year, that's 20 times, and they never even knew that the adversaries were already in the network and that they were breached. So that this underscores this massive problem that we have, that pen testing and vulnerability assessments are simply missing that networks have been compromised, and we're using them to base if we're secure or not, right? Not good. All of this adds up to this false sense of security and uncertainty. Think about it. Cybersecurity testing really does not tell us if we're secure or not, right? It may tell us some things, but you cannot conclusively say that you are secure based on your pen testing and vulnerability scanning. If you don't believe me, that we live in this age of uncertainty, why is it so hard for CISOs to simply answer, are we secure, when they're pressed by their boardrooms, right? Why can't the CISOs better answer that question? Well, it's not a simple answer when you're going off of pen testing and vulnerability scanning. You never really know. And it turns into being more about the overall ability to detect, respond, and recover from attacks, right? So looking at this a little deeper, we have to accept that there are some hard truths about cybersecurity, okay? We have to accept that we may not have the best hypothesis starting out. And what are we missing? What are we missing? Well, for starters, none of our cybersecurity testing programs are considering that the adversary is already in the network, that they're already inside. We're always looking from the outside, right? That's what pen testing does. It looks from the outside. We're never accounting that they're on the inside already. And when you have that, you have incomplete results. You could be compromised and you may never know if you're just judging off the results from your pen tests and vulnerability scanning. So it's incomplete by nature. We're also, we also got to understand that, look, the weakest link, end users are always at play here. And compromise is always going to be as simple as clicking a link, regardless of your best security controls, right? So no matter what, compromise is just a click away. It's at the fingertips of one of the employees. It's going to happen. So these are all major problems and challenges that we have that we must consider when we're evolving our cybersecurity protocols. So what can we do, right? What are some of the solutions here? Well, first off, we have no other option but to get better, to keep improving. We have to evolve. As Winston Churchill once said, to improve is to change, to be perfect To be perfect is to change often. And I think that really applies here with our cybersecurity testing methodologies. Now, that's not to say this is going to be easy. Growth is painful, change is painful, but nothing is as painful as being stuck where you don't belong. And we must come to terms with that. And that's what we're doing, right? That's why you guys are here listening to this webinar. Now, when you look at a couple other industries that have really perfected testing and used it to grow their industries, you know, the medical industry and aviation industry, they have come a tremendous length, a really long way to really include better safety and change how their industry performs. There's no reason why we as cybersecurity cannot do this as well, right? As previously mentioned, every modern amenity we have is because of the effectiveness of testing. These didn't just come out of thin air here. We have to get after it. We have to make it happen. And that's what we're going to do with continuous compromise assessments, which I'm going to get into. But before I do, let's look at these industries a little further, okay? So aviation, if you go back, even just 30 years, there were a lot of accidents. So on average, there were 20 average accidents every year with aircrafts, okay? It was an eye-popping number, and the industry knew that they need to do something. And they started making changes with technology, with training programs, with risk management, how they went about testing, right? All of this made the way to major improvements. And now, when you look at the statistics, transportation, aviation, flying is actually one of the safest forms of transportation out there. Statistically, you have more chances of being killed riding a bicycle or by lightning than riding in an airplane. And again, it wasn't always like this. They had to perform relentless testing to get to this stage. And there's no reason why we can't learn from what they did in this industry and apply it to cybersecurity as well, right? All right, so getting a little more specific on their, aviation testing best practices, it really boils down to a combination of several factors. First off, they made some major engineering changes to their airplanes. They went from a pistol engine to a jet engine. Right there, it was a huge milestone. They got away from analog technology more into digital. Air traffic control technology improved. So engineering really, went a lot further in development. There were also great strides in safety management, right? So, different human factors came into play. But I think most importantly, there became this new culture of safety in the whole industry at large, where, there was trainings and they had to do flight simulators, and all of these changes started to contributing to a safer industry. And this is why today, I want to highlight the aviation industry, because they've come such a long way, right? It wasn't always pretty out there with accidents and what they had to deal with, but they worked hard, they made stuff happen, and they evolved. And that's what we as an industry have to do with cybersecurity as well. Now let's talk a little bit about medical, the other industry. I want to draw some parallels here. So hepatitis C, my wife actually works on hepatitis C, and I got some good information from her. So hepatitis C was discovered in 1989, all right? And it was transfused for a few years when you donated blood, because there wasn't even a system to look for it. They couldn't even detect it. But in 1992, they started to detect it, and a test was developed, and so blood supplies became safe, and there was a huge jump in improvement. Now, 2014, there's better treatments. So, they're now moving towards the goal of eradicating hepatitis C from the face of Earth by 2030. It's really remarkable. And I think the takeaway message from that is, if you can find it, you can treat it. Now, breast cancer, same story. they've been very successful at improving the death rate and survival rate, really by awareness, again, kind of like the aviation industry, awareness of detection. But you have to be on top of the actual disease. You have to be able to detect it. If you can detect it, you can then treat it. It's not just letting it manifest and then finding it after the fact. And I think, these are really interesting because it's much like compromises and breaches, right? A lot of times, hepatitis C, breast cancer, they may not show their symptoms, much like compromises and breaches, but you can't wait until it's too late for treatment. And that's really why I'm underscoring, these two examples in the medical field as improvement areas. Another way to look at this, that we're losing the war in cybersecurity is to compare and contrast global impact disease over time. You look at some of the accomplishments they've been able to make. There's been diseases already eradicated off Earth. Polio, for example, smallpox, higher cure rates with cancer, people no longer dying of AIDS thanks to treatment. There are a lot of examples where the impact throughout the history of time has really decreased. Now, contrasting that with the cybersecurity side, and again, going through all those events with the breaches with Target, UPS, Home Depot, you name it, there's major fallout from this. The numbers only keep going up. It's only getting more serious as we go in time, right? That's not good. It's really underscoring that we're going the wrong direction here, and we need to make some changes. So what's the difference? Why are there serious differences between how global impact of diseases, versus global impact of cyber threats? Well, for one, I think lives are at stake. Behavior is going to change very quickly when lives are at stake, and also the awareness is there. So they're continuing to evolve their testing. They're making changes. That's why you're seeing, all these changes out on this on the front with the impact of disease. All right. So now let's talk a little bit again about, how can we improve as an industry? What really needs to happen for us? That's great. We looked at these other industries. Let's bring it back home to the cybersecurity world. First off, like I said, we got to come to terms that our cybersecurity testing program is flawed, right? Why is it flawed? Well, as this slide says, we are not assuming that the adversary is already inside. We've already seen it with Citrix and those other examples that adversaries were lurking inside without detection from our cybersecurity testing. We never even knew about it, right? So, this is problematic. And we must really emphasize and accept that, it's likely that the adversary is already inside. We must have that attitude. Now, when you actually break this down even a whole nother level, and going back to Thomas Edison and the scientific method example, you can really apply the scientific method to cybersecurity, and we do this here. And this is just one example here. Okay, first let's make an observation. This is easy, right? Data breaches are growing exponentially in spite of record investments with security tools and in spite of our security testing programs, right? That's the observation. I think we all can agree with that. Ask a question, why are these breaches continue to happen in spite of all these investments? What's going on here? What's occurring? Form the hypothesis, all right? Maybe, just maybe, here's an idea, right? If we involve and improve security testing methods, breaches are going to decrease, right? We have to, let's find out. We gotta test this hypothesis. So the next step is then conducting an experiment. Analyze the network data to find compromises. This is one way we can evolve that I'm going to show you, that I'm going to get into. You can actually bring your network data into the equation, into your security programs. And once you do so, let's verify that it's really adding value. You do that by analyzing the data. You do that by seeing if there is really change with the breach statistics, if there's greater cyber resilience, are we improving as an industry? Finally, once you do that, it's not done. It's never done. You keep iterating, you keep developing and getting better and better and better, just like Thomas Edison did with that light bulb. At first, it didn't last as long as he wanted. He kept testing, he made it better and better. That's what we need to do here with cybersecurity testing protocols. So what can you guys do now? How can we, really evolve your own cybersecurity testing programs? Well, as Albert Einstein famously said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if you're still going back and you're just going to do your pen testing and vulnerability scanning, that's great, but you're still not accounting for if the adversaries are already inside the network. So my advice is evolve your security testing. Let's improve. Remember, if you can find it, you can treat it. And you must think this way with compromise. So how do you detect a compromise? Well, that's what you get into unlocking your company's network metadata. You continuously and consistently use your organization's network data to tell your story. Why? Because within it lies your compromise story. The adversaries, they must use your network to carry out attacks. So if you're on top of your network data, you're on top of the adversarial activity. And that early detection and treatment are absolutely critical. So this is how you can get started. All right, now you're probably wondering what exactly is a continuous compromise assessment anyway? What does this even mean? And let alone, how can you bring it to your organization? Well, the answer, what is a continuous compromise assessment? It's fairly simple. It's the ability to always have context when your IT infrastructure is communicating with adversaries. Context meaning when, where, and how, which of your assets is communicating with hostile infrastructure. If you know this, you're going to be able to detect and respond. So it's really a completely new mindset where you're assuming you're going to be compromised in the first place. You're not just resting your laurels in your pen testing and vulnerability scanning. You're actually knowing that you're going to get compromised, that the adversaries are going to be in your network, and then you're looking for it. That's what the assessment can do, and there's technology that can enable this for you. That's what's cool. So how do you bring this to your organization? Well, we talked about your network metadata, right? And that's your gold mine. That's what you have to use. At this very moment, your organization is generating huge amounts of metadata. And let's start with your DNS queries. The first thing a compromised device does is it attempts to resolve to a domain that belongs to an adversarial domain. So if this is happening, if you can be on top of your DNS queries, you're going to be able to tell if your organization has been compromised. Very simple. Now, if the attacker does not use domain infrastructure, the only other way they can get in is the north-south through the firewalls. And this is why you have to be on top of your firewall and proxy data as well. Okay? This is where we watch what's happening there. Finally, once you have the adversaries are in, they're going to move east-west, that lateral movement. And this is why your network metadata, if you can start correlating what's happening at your network level, you're going to be able to see when adversaries are moving laterally within your network. Last but not least, spam box. All right, most institutions are content by simply blocking spam. That's fine, that's great, it's good to block spam. But what if you evolve it and take it to the next level and you start to analyze it? You start to see how people are trying to attack you, who and how. Vital information that's going to tell you your compromised story. So what you're able to do is correlate all these different data streams and run it continuously so that you always know if your network has been compromised. It's powerful, it's there, and you can be using this into your security program. Now, once you do that, once you guys accept that you can intentionally measure compromise, you know, it's a major transformation. And, you know, we like to point out at Lumu, you know, isn't it ironic that the one thing that we try to achieve with cybersecurity in the first place is to prevent compromise and breaches. Yet it's also the one thing we do not measure quantitatively or directly. You know, we have no numbers telling us what's going on. When you start measuring intentionally, you enable a feedback loop. The attacks are going to come into your infrastructure. You know, if you are getting compromised, you're going to know how your security program, how your security architecture is actually performing. You're going to have metrics around it, right? What we know is what gets measured, right? And when you can measure something, you can actually manage it. And that's the power of measuring compromise. Look, if your compromise levels are really high and you've invested in a ton of cybersecurity tools, something's wrong, something's off. Those tools aren't really doing what they're saying they're doing. There's still gaps and holes. So you can really use this to validate your security architecture. All right, I want to start wrapping this up. And before I do, I want to leave you with the famous quote by Steve Dinn. Right? You guys have probably seen this one before, but in case you haven't, one can never make the same mistake twice, because the second time it is not a mistake, it's a choice, right? And we can, in essence, continue down this road we are with our cybersecurity testing as it is, or we can consciously and deliberately take a step to evolve, which is really what I encourage you guys to do. And with that, I want to thank each of you for joining today's session. I hope it was time well spent for you. If you are interested in learning more about Lumu and the concept of continuous compromise assessment, I invite you to contact me via email or my cell phone. I'm now going to review the questions that were presented and turn it back over to Maria. Feel free to keep submitting questions using the chat box.
Perfect. You can still submit your questions. In the meantime, here's your first question, David. How is it possible to see compromise in minutes?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, how can you enable this immediately? Well, you know, we actually have set this up with our Lumu free product, where you can point your DNS to Lumu for analysis. So all of your internal DNS queries that you know are going right now at this minute with all your IT assets, you know, they're communicating with different IP addresses. Send that to Lumu, and we're going to be able to show you if your assets are indeed communicating with adversaries and start that process of continuous compromise assessment.
Perfect. So here's another question. How do I convince my manager to use other forms of testing?
Okay, great question, right? It's always up to the manager. I think, you know, there a couple things about this question. When you start telling your manager that we need to better understand our compromise level, that I want to start having a mindset that the adversaries are already in our network and not just rest on what our pen tests and vulnerability scanning is saying, you know, that should really get their attention, right? And how, you know, how can you really show actual results? Back to Lumu Free. So you can open up a Lumu Free account right off our website. Go ahead, forward your DNS to us, and we are going to show you where your assets are already communicating with hostile infrastructure, right? That's going to get attention. That's going to start the conversation and introduce this whole new concept to them. So, you know, that's what I would recommend to those on the call looking to present this idea to their manager.
Perfect. Here's another question. What is a mistake that people make when designing their security testing practice?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest one, which I tried to really show today, was they don't consider the adversaries already in their network, right? It's always, you know, it's always been the mindset, let's make sure our gate is secure and test from the outside. You know, let's do pen testing, try to get in, see where there are gaps and fill those gaps. And, you know, we've never really taken the approach where, hey, the adversary's already in our network. And you know, let's develop a standard test around that to include in our annual testing or our quarterly testing, because you know, you've seen it through these breaches. You know, it's happened where they've been very diligently conducting their pen testing, vulnerability scanning multiple times a year, yet the adversaries have gone unnoticed within their network. So, you know, the biggest mistake I'd say is our biggest, you know, opportunity for improvement, overcome that limitation, right, is to assume that the adversaries are already in your network and develop tests around that to prove otherwise.
Beautiful. I see that there are more questions in the queue, but we are short on time. So the rest of the questions will be followed up by David personally or one of our other cybersecurity experts via email. So this concludes our webinar. Thank you so much, David, for such a fantastic discussion. And we thank our audience also for their time. And we wish you a great day.